Hey everyone, just thought I would jump on here to share with you all some of my top tips for putting a CV together. So I've recently been recruiting for a new role in my team. It's taken far longer than it should have done. It's taken months just to find the right candidate. I've interviewed probably over 16 people and I don't even want to think about the number of CVs that I've gone through. But during that process, it really made me think about the things that you do and you don't like about CVs, the things that really put you off when you're trying to sift through. And I thought I'm going to use all that experience and all that time that I've spent sifting through CVs to kind of put together what I think, my own personal opinion, are the top 5 things to look at when you're putting your CV together. So number 1 for me is formatting. I think formatting is the absolute most important thing when you're putting your CV together. In most cases, your CV is going to be the first impression that an interviewer has of you. It's the first thing they've seen that resembles you. And you don't want to put somebody off because they look at your CV and they just don't like it. And it happens. I've been guilty of that myself. You've got so many CVs to go through. You see a CV you don't like the formatting of, or it's all too bunched up, and you're just going to move on. You're not going to look at it. And it's a shame because it could be such a really good candidate that's never going to get the opportunity to be invited to the interview. So formatting for me is the most important. When I talk about formatting, I mean make sure there's enough white space on the page. Don't bunch everything up so close to each other because you're so worried that it has to fit on one page. It doesn't. It can go onto 2 pages. And you want to make sure there's enough space so it's clear, so that your CV has a flow to it and it's really clear what you've got on there, and making sure that it draws out the key elements that you want to. So make sure there's a lot of white space on there. Make sure you use bullet points. It's really good for just getting across those snippets of tasks that you can do, those roles and responsibilities that you want to make sure are really clear and you're drawing out from your CV. Probably sounds quite simple, but make sure the format is all the same on your font. So I would always justify the text. It just lines up the text on the left and the right, just makes it look really clean, makes it look nicer in my opinion. You also want to make sure you use the right consistency in terms of your font and your size and format as you flow through your CV. So if whenever you have a new role, it's always in bold and it's always underlined, make sure you do that every time. Make sure you don't change the size, because aesthetically when you're looking at a CV you can notice those things, and it does honestly really put you off. It puts me off anyway, rightly or wrongly. And then lastly, in terms of formatting, if you're applying for jobs through an agency, be aware that they will copy your CV and they will paste it onto an agency headed template. When they do that, it often throws the flow or the formatting of your CV off. I've seen quite a few CVs come through, the formatting has really put me off, but I've had to give them the benefit of the doubt because it's through an agency. And I personally would never trust an agency that is going to review in detail. So if you are applying through an agency, always ask to see the CV before it goes out to any potential employer. End of the day, this is the first impression they're going to have of you. The CV is representing you, so make sure you are 100% happy with it. So top tip number 1 is formatting. Number 2 is tailoring. Make sure on your CV you've really understood the job spec that you're applying for, and make sure you've tailored your CV so it really highlights the skills and experiences that are needed. So if your experience that you have is really broad, make sure you focus it a bit more in your CV, specifically around the requirements that are being asked for in the job spec. Another good tip I have is to make sure you pick out any keywords, phrases, terminology that are in the job spec and try and feed them into your CV somewhere, so it's as if you're talking to that employer specifically about that role. It just really stands out and really helps your case. Number 3, if you're applying, if you've worked in jobs before and companies that may be small, maybe people aren't aware of them, they're not well-known companies, or you're applying abroad like I did. I moved from the UK to Canada and I'm applying to a completely different market, so the companies that I worked for in the UK mean nothing to anybody in Canada. So if you're in a similar situation like that, where people aren't going to understand the companies that you've worked in, then as you're filling in your CV, make sure you just put like a sentence, just something down that kind of explains the background of the company, what industry they're in, and you also want something that's going to give a good indicator to the interviewer of the size of that company. So it could be the turnover, it could be the number of employees, or some other kind of KPI that's really used a lot in the industry in which you work in, because that way it just puts it into context as to whether you've worked in a small company, a big company, what kind of scope you would have had, and it really then helps that employer understand the background that you have. Number 4, please make sure you don't have any unexplained gaps. really puts me off when I'm looking at a CV, and I'm probably quite strange, I always work from the backwards up. And I always look at kind of the education, and I start from what's their first role, second role, and I always tie up the dates. If there's a gap and it's not explained, it just calls into question to me, why is there a gap? There's no problem having a gap. I have gaps on my CV. I went travelling. I took time out to go volunteering abroad. It's absolutely fine to have gaps of employment, but make sure you explain them in your CV. So it says you took time out to go travelling, you had time out on maternity leave, etc. Otherwise it just causes into question with the interview. It just is another little alarm bell that rings as to this is strange, there are gaps and they're not explained. Lastly, my number 5 tip is proofread. Please proofread your CV. I mentioned before about formatting and errors that I have seen, and some cases if it's come through an agency, I put it down, give them benefit of the doubt and put it down that it's just when the agency have copied and pasted it across. But there really is no excuse for typos or grammatical errors in your CV. Please proofread it. Proofread it numerous times, and if possible, get someone else independent to read it for you, someone to read it cold, because obviously when you're reading the same thing over and over again, you're going to miss things. You're obviously going to miss things, but you want somebody to come and read it cold and to maybe pick out anything that, you've missed a capital letter, you've missed a comma, or you've missed a space, because they're really, really important. And I can't stress enough that your CV is that first impression you are giving to an employer. And as superficial as it may sound, it does make a difference. When you've got an employer who has hundreds of CVs to look through, if they don't like the look of yours, they are not going to bother reading it. One, because it's going to be too complicated to read, it's going to be hard to follow through if the formatting's not in an easy format. And also because if you haven't taken that care and attention on your CV, what does that say about you as a person and as a candidate? And do they really want somebody who they don't think takes pride in what they do to be part of their organisation? Probably not. Realise that's probably really unfair, but when you've got so many CVs to look through, you need some kind of methodology for sifting them through. So they are my personal top tips. It's really interesting when you look through so many CVs how picky you can be, or how picky I've realised I can be, and which is why I wanted to just share with you all. If I can help in any way in CVs that you're putting together, then I really hope this has helped. Okay, thank you.